Well, hello, friends. How is everyone doing today? It's good to see y'all and be together. We are taking a look at Second Chronicles. Um, I listened through all of Second Chronicles this morning, and it's long. But here's the good news: there's not a lot of lists of just names and things like we had through a lot of First Chronicles. Second Chronicles is mostly narrative that tracks with the book of um, Second Kings, as far as a lot of the same events and a lot of specific things that are very much or exactly the same. So there's two kind of challenges or things that I want you to think about here in Second Chronicles. One is because we have so much repetition of the same things, do we understand the important things that are going on at this time in the biblical story, in the history of God's people? Because we have double chance to review it, it's extra good chance for us to sort of, instead of saying, oh, I think I read this already, think, do I understand this? Do I understand what's going on here? That would be kind of the major thing that we're looking for. I also want you to look for differences that stand out. Now, if we could flip back and forth and do extensive time study and find a lot, probably more of those things. But I just am curious if there are things that just become obvious to you reading Second Chronicles from reading Second Kings. So I'm going to point out one thing that's really significant, I think, today. But I'm curious what other things you're seeing or finding. You can certainly feel free to point those things out. So Second Chronicles, and I'm tracking with through. I think Saturday might have been the first day through today, which is Tuesday. And man, this reading plan is giving us some big chunks, right? 4 or 5 chapters a day to read through here. Again, fortunately, it's narrative, so it's not sort of too bad there. So we track back with Solomon, and he is king. We don't have recorded the conflict stuff that comes up so much. Remember when Solomon becomes king? So that kind of is hinting us in a little bit already on some things that aren't included. What does the author of Second Chronicles choose not to include? Where is the focus here for this particular thing? So we see Solomon is king, as we saw before. He has this dream where it just says here, actually in verse 7, chapter 1, that night God appeared to Solomon and said to him, ask for whatever you want. And of course, Solomon answers that question. And there's differences in so much of this stuff. And again, I'm just not gonna, but there's even differences in what God. I mean, it's the same gist. It's the same idea. It's not like a big conflict. But there's language there's parts of it that aren't included here in Second Chronicles, which is just really really interesting. So chapter 2, Solomon begins to build the temple, and in chapter 3 and 4, those things are going on. I'm not going to talk a lot about a depth of that. In chapter 5, the temple is completed, and the ark of the covenant is brought up. And it's interesting that we saw in First Chronicles that the ark has not been in the tabernacle. The tabernacle is in one place, but David brought the ark into Jerusalem, so they're in different places and made a different tent sort of for it. But now the ark is coming home, not back to the tabernacle, but the temple is now going to be the more enduring structure. Well, it doesn't endure forever because of the rebellion of God's people, but anyway, that's the idea, and it will get rebuilt after that. So he brings the ark up to the temple, which is on Mount Moriah from Zion, which is the city of David. I thought about trying to grab one. I didn't, though. But having an atlas or an illustration of how Jerusalem is laid out would be helpful to understand these texts as well, if that's something that's interesting to you. So we see this refrain, this song. We've seen it extended out in places as well. It's in the Psalms a lot also that we'll see. But he is good. His love endures forever. That's kind of the refrain of the praise of God as all these things are happening. At the end of chapter 5, we see then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. It's like the end of Exodus. Remember, they build the tabernacle. It's done right, and this glory cloud fills it, so Moses can't enter in. And then Leviticus teaches us sort of about that. So chapter 6, and again we have a lot of the same material of the prayer, the blessing, the prayer of Solomon that we have in Samuel that we saw. And this is worth spending some time looking back through. I'm not going to work through it, but just devotionally and understanding things, it would be really the content of this prayer is really significant. And then in chapter 7, when Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices. This reminds me of like Elijah on Mount Carmel, right? And the glory of the Lord filled the temple. We have it's kind of a repetition there, right? At the end of chapter 5 and in chapter 6 of that. So here's something interesting. Chapter 7 is a passage of scripture that, I don't know, American Christians at least love. Part of this passage of scripture that comes in chapter 7 in verse 14. This is not anywhere else. This is only in Chronicles, not in Samuel. And it's this, again, well known to a lot of people, of course. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn away from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and will heal their land. I want to challenge you as we're here doing this reading in the Bible thing, if that's a scripture that warms your heart as it does for a lot of people, and you can get there to an extent, but be careful how you use that passage of scripture, because there's a very specific historical context that's going on here. This is not talking, at least first and foremost, about the United States of America or any other country. This is in response to specifically prayer oriented towards this temple for the nation of Israel in the ancient world. That's what this promise is about. So if you want to apply it more widely, you have to do some work to ask questions like, what is different from today? How does that change these things? How does, the God who is a consistent God, but what are the people of God now look like? And how do different nations relate to God differently than this? That's the work that you have to do, I think, to apply this passage of scripture well to other places and times like our own. It's not just a carryover, just pull these words off the page and then speak them over the United States. There's some interpretive work that needs to be done. So you may not like that. Some of you, that may challenge you, but I think it's important. We have to use the Bible well. We don't just apply things in ways that we like. We need to be faithful interpreters and appliers. It's a weird word, but of scripture. So, but anyway, that passage that you probably know pretty well, here's where it's found. Here's the context that it's in. And we should at baseline be familiar with that context. And so we have here as well the warnings, verse 17. if you walk before me faithfully as David your father did, and do all that I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne. As your father David, as I said, you shall never fail to have an successor on the throne to rule over Israel. But, verse 19, but if you turn away and forsake the decrees and commands that I've given you today, and go off and serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot Israel from my land, right? It's from my land, which I have given them. So whose land is it? God says, it's my land that I've given them. So there's a both and of this. It's the land that these people, God's people, have been given to inhabit, but ultimately it's his land. He's not given over ownership and saying, okay, it's yours, and I'm just, I don't have anything to say about it anymore. Signed it over to you. Still his land. He's given them to live there. And we've seen this in other places already so far. So hopefully we can understand the tension there of whose land is it. It's God's land that he's given for his people to live in a very significant way, right? But if so, then I will uproot Israel from my land, which I've given them, and I will reject this temple that I have consecrated for my name. I will make it a byword and an object of ridicule among the peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. So on this joyous day, God is not afraid to say, yeah, this is great, but, and you've heard this from me in these videos before, but if you don't understand the real point, if you don't understand the depth, this thing's not going to mean a thing. You cannot hide in here from me. I'm here, I'm everywhere. So, there's that sort of challenge there. So, and I'm going to end here at the end of, so 8 and 9 has more Solomon's other activities. The Queen of Sheba visits Solomon, and she's so impressed. We saw this before. Solomon's splendor, everything that he accomplishes. Chapter 9, verse 23. All the kings of the earth sought audience with Solomon to hear his wisdom that God had put on his heart. Year after year, everyone brought a gift. He had all these horses. The king, verse 27, the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as fig trees. As for all these other events, aren't they recorded in yet another book that we don't have anymore? Then he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, his father. And Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king. So what's missing? What's missing with Solomon? From 1 Chronicles, what's missing from David's life? Hey, Ethan, what's up? Good to see you, pal. I don't know if you've done any, you, Ethan, or anybody else who's joining us later here, if you've done any comparative study with the books of Samuel and the book of Chronicles, with David and Solomon, something's missing. What's missing in Chronicles is their sinfulness. Bathsheba, the story with David and Bathsheba and Uriah, is not in 1 Chronicles. Solomon's story does not end very well in the Samuel account. Remember, he marries all these other women and he turns away and he allows all this idolatrous worship and these kind of things. That's nowhere to be found in 2 Chronicles. The portrait of Solomon is, I don't know if pristine may be an overstatement, but this account is recalling the positive contribution and character of David and Solomon in particular here as we go forward in the story, whereas 1st and 2nd Samuel has more rounded accounts, I guess, if you will, of them and their significant times of shortcomings. So it's interesting, as we have a Bible today, Scripture. I think it's great that we have now both of these accounts, which again are so much repetition and so much parallel, but they give us some different things we've seen today, and also they give us different accounts in certain ways, right? Different portrayals. More positive kind of contribution, more you know, well-rounded, I guess, if you could say, if you want to include the sort of negative stuff too. So maybe it'd be like at someone's funeral today. We don't tend to really spend time dredging up the person's shortcomings and the major mistakes that they made in their life. That's kind of not the occasion to do that. But if we were going to write a really honest biography of a person's life, we would have to include those things, right? Their major challenges and shortcomings, right, that they really messed up. And so it's kind of different ways of telling a person's story. So we see that about David and Solomon here in these accounts. So, all right, what else have you guys seen here? What are you thinking? How are you processing? I'd love to hear. And I will see you again soon.